Sunday, August 10, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minute news. Our guest today is a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalist and author of several books, including The Big Cheat, How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself and His Family. He's professor of practice in the College of Liberal Arts at Rochester Institute of Technology. David Cay Johnston, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Anthony, good to be with you again.
David, you've known Trump and written about and reported on him for over 30 years. And since we last spoke just ahead of Trump's inauguration, you correctly predicted the carnage that would unleash upon the American people and the wider world in his second term. Has this second term proved more dangerous than you had anticipated?
Oh, indeed. They've done things I didn't see coming, and there aren't many of those. I couldn't have imagined, for example, that they would take hundreds or thousands of tons of food destined for the poorest countries in Africa and incinerate them. They plan to incinerate IUDs, birth control pills, and other contraceptives that were destined for some of the poorest parts of Africa, which means, of course, that very poor people there will have more children. And the degree of nastiness and cruelty by ICE. ICE agents have literally grabbed a parent out of a car and left a small child in a seatbelt or a carrier in the back seat. You or I did that in America, and I assume also in the UK, you'd get arrested for that. There's footage out today of a man who was simply recording an ICE raid on his phone being beaten by police in Washington, D.C.
The visuals of these abductions and kidnappings and disappearings are reminiscent of 1930s Germany and some of the worst of history. Do you think Americans can make that comparison? Because as I see it, there's that famous book, It Could Never Happen Here. Right. Is that what's happening now, that there is a collective disassociation because it is literally so bad and the US is just not cut out for an authoritarian takeover of government?
My wife and I took our vacation by going to something called the Chautauqua Institution. It's you go to lectures and learn about things about the world, and we picked the week that was about the rise of authoritarianism, not just in America, but around the world. And one of the classes I took was very revealing. It was about 7 fascist dictatorships, starting with Mussolini, the original fascist, and going through 7 others. And all of them have some consistent things. And one is the public doesn't see this coming and they can't grasp and appreciate what's happening until it's too late in Spain, Chile, Germany, Italy, etc. Secondly, it doesn't last. The longest fascist dictatorship was Franco in Spain. The others dissolved relatively more quickly because they're doing exactly what Trump is doing. Trump has appointed the worst people, utterly incompetent people, grifters, family members, and without a competent government, eventually things fall apart. But the damage that gets done in the meantime is absolutely atrocious. I don't believe that a large segment of the American public will appreciate what's happening because we don't do a very good job anymore of teaching civics in the United States. We do teach it, but not well. America's full of people you can stop and say, well, how does a law become a law? And they'll say, well, the president declares it. They don't understand the Constitution at all. So I'm very worried about that. The one area where I do think Donald Trump is absolutely vulnerable and can end his presidency is if we get solid proof from all of the billowing smoke coming out of the White House, enormous amount of smoke, that Donald Trump is a serial child rapist. And we've had, 24 women accuse him There are videotapes. There are interviews of these women. And someone posted what I thought was a very interesting meme the other day. If 20 young white women said that they had been molested or raped by a black man, how would this be treated? And of course, race is a very, very dominant factor in American society. But if this story keeps going, if the Democrats are smart about promoting it, if the MAGAs who were promised the Epstein files are smart about it, and journalists do their job, I don't think Donald Trump can survive being established as a repeated child rapist.
He does have form in this area regarding the Access Hollywood tape, for example, which people thought was going to prevent his presidency the first time around because it was so egregious. His voice on tape saying they just let you do it, grabbing women by the genitals and everything else. And yet barely a whimper, even in the evangelical movement that was supporting him. They were like, well, people have their flaws, but he's still the chosen one.
Right.
Do you not think that will happen this time around too?
The difference is Stormy Daniels is a grown woman. The other women he's talked that have come up are grown women. These are children, as young as apparently 12 years old. Donald Trump actually said on the Howard Stern show, which is a just disgusting American radio show where he was frequently on, that 12 was his age limit, which tells you 13 to him was okay. Years ago, roughly 35 years ago, I wrote about how Donald had gotten children who were 12, 13, and 14 gambling in his casinos. They had money, and they were given liquor and limousines and hotel suites. And when I asked Donald about that at the time, he went, yeah, I had to pay a fine. There's no moral outrage in him. And of course, nobody mistakes a 12, 13, or 14-year-old for a 21-year-old. We're not talking about dolled up 18 or 19-year-olds. We're talking about children. And so given that there are videos from some of these women, their stories have been consistent. There's lots of smoke there. And of course, Donald has talked about, he talked about the 10-year-old girl he passed on the elevator and said, I'll be dating her in 10 years. The Justice Department can release all the files it has right now. And if that's what Trump promised, they're not going to do that. So I've been encouraging various journalists and some lawyers who called me about ways to go at this sideways. There's a settlement with the government in the Virgin Islands. They got $102 million from the estate. There are lots of records held by the lawyers for the estate of Jeffrey Epstein. Start subpoenaing them, start finding ways to ask them for the records, because apparently those lawyers are pretty stand-up guys. And the key to that is keeping that story alive and bringing forth new revelations. And indeed, the lawyer who represents a number of the women, believed to number roughly 1,000, by the way, has said that his clients want this stuff to be out in the public record. So the argument that we're protecting the innocent victims, who are now in their 30s and 40s, is absurd. You can redact their names and keep the rest of it. I'm particularly interested in, there apparently were a number of photographs, video recordings, some of them on discs, found during the government's raids on the New York, up the street from Mar-a-Lago and island in the Caribbean properties owned by Epstein. I'd also like to see, and I've been pushing people to demand all the business and trading records. Jeffrey Epstein worked briefly on Wall Street, was no genius on Wall Street, and yet he had all this money he's managing for Leslie Wexner, the founder of The Limited, a big multi-brand retail chain in America, and other people. Well, if he was actually managing their money, then there would be trading records. There would be statements, either monthly or quarterly, and they would show what kind of distributions and profits were made. On the other hand, if Jeffrey Epstein, as a former high-level Mossad leader, has said repeatedly now for more than a decade, was, among other things, working for the Israeli intelligence to compromise people and then get intelligence the Israelis wanted out of them, if in fact he was extorting people who were his quote-unquote clients we can show that by seeing that there are no distributions and no records. And imagine for a moment, Anthony, that you are a multi-billionaire. You've built up some big business. You're incredibly successful, whether it was luck or business smarts. And I have video of you having sex with a 13-year-old girl. How much would you pay me to avoid losing your fortune and going to prison for the rest of your life, which is what would happen to you in the U.S., or certainly close to the rest of your life, depending on your age? Was Jeffrey Epstein in the extortion business or the investment business? You don't need to involve the victims to establish that. And I don't see anywhere near the same confidentiality. Now, I don't think that'll resonate the same with the general public, but among the reasonably sophisticated Americans, I think it will change the tone of things. And notice this is the one area where the MAGA movement is having some people peel off from it or question it. Right. Joe Rogan, very influential podcaster. Marjorie Taylor Greene, absolutely uneducated, foolish. I mean, she does have a college degree, but uneducated, foolish member of Congress who just makes things up, Jewish space lasers causing fires and things like that. She's broken with Trump on this issue, and so have some others. On the other hand, Representative Salazar, a woman who represents part of the Miami area in Congress, I posted about her recently because she says we should leave Donald alone. In other words, I want to protect an accused child rapist. And people should never, ever forget that.
The problem, though, as I see it, is that we are living under a lawless society with Trump at the helm because the judiciary is compromised. And so what chance is there under this regime of ever bringing anybody to justice? I mean, Ghislaine Maxwell has just been, effectively had her sentence reduced by being moved to a much lower security prison. Right. She's basically been given freedom in that prison. And so with Pam Bondi compromised, with Todd Blanche compromised, with the Supreme Court compromised, justice certainly for white-collar crime, or in this case, sex offenders, what is the likelihood of Trump or any of his cohorts ever seeing justice under these terms?
Well, without a doubt, the U.S. Justice Department now has been totally corrupted. We have a corrupt attorney general. We have Donald Trump's trial lawyer, who wasn't very good, frankly, at his trial where he was convicted on 34 felony counts in number 2 position. We have Kash Patel, who's a denier about January 6th and the rest of it, a total Trump loyalist, running the FBI when he's not doing other things because he actually lives in Las Vegas, not Washington. So I think there's no likelihood that we will see the Justice Department do this. And we're seeing career prosecutors either resigning or being fired because they did their jobs, including the prosecutor who put Ghislaine Maxwell in the joint. But state attorneys general have some authority here, and so do some local prosecutors. So, some years ago, I wrote a piece in the New York Daily News laying out a roadmap for Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan district attorney who won the conviction of Trump, on how to go after him for income tax fraud. Very few people in America know a story I broke 8 years ago. Donald Trump has been tried twice for income tax fraud. Now, they were civil, not criminal trials, but he was shown to be a forger. His own lawyer testified against him. And he invented non-existent business and took hundreds of thousands of dollars in deductions when he had no records. He was sternly ordered in both cases to never do that again. Well, we know from the tax returns that the Democrats made public at the end of 2020 that, lo and behold, Donald Trump did this 60 times in 6 years. That's if there's ever a slam dunk white collar crime case to win, it's that one. You got him. Bragg chose not to go after him. Okay, fine. That's his choice. But I think there are things he can go after now. There are no criminal charges to be brought. The statute of limitations has run on all of the raping of young women. So I think that civil court actions and some creative lawyering. I talked the other day to a lawyer who called me about this, and he was trying to figure out a strategy by which he could get a client who has some standing in this matter and then use discovery. And after all, the Supreme Court has held in the Bill Clinton, Paula Jones case that, or Jennifer Flowers, I forget which one of those women he had dalliances with, that a United States president is not immune from civil prosecution, particularly for things done outside of his office. And he could be put under oath and documents could be produced. But what's essential here is vigorous, continued pursuit of this. You know, Watergate, I was a journalist during Watergate, not in Washington, however, and Watergate in the beginning, very few people paid attention to it. It didn't matter a lot. And then things shifted because there was just a growing weight of evidence against Richard Nixon. Now, equally troubling is what's going on in the U.S. courts. But a number of judges appointed by Donald Trump have stood up for the law, have not knuckled under to him. And at the U.S. Supreme Court level, where there are 6 conservatives, at least 2 of whom are willing to throw the Constitution in the trash, there is the distinct chance that Trump can lose on matters if they're properly framed. Because at the end of the day, what's the point of being a justice on the United States Supreme Court if you have no respect or authority and you're seen as a hack? Well, that doesn't.
Have we not seen that multiple times now from the Supreme Court? I mean,
yes.
At what point? Because again, this feels to me a little bit like, us burying our heads in the sand about how the Supreme Court is going to rule. I mean, they already gave him some kind of blanket immunity, which is completely unprecedented.
Right.
It's very clear which side 6 of the 9 judges are on.
But he hasn't won on every issue, Anthony. He's lost on some of
Sure.
the issues before the Supreme Court. And not all of his arguments are going to work. And by the way, the immunity decision in 2023 is really significant because when you have a case before the Supreme Court, there is what's called the question presented. And right at the beginning of the filings, it'll say, this is the question before the court. The Supreme Court in the immunity case took up a question that was never asked and went way out there with, well, what if some future president were to be prosecuted after he left office for official actions? And they said, you can't do that. That wasn't presented. That was the most troubling decision the court has made. And of course, it could play both ways. We could end up with a liberal president at some point who behaves like a dictator, as Trump is. I mean, Trump, let's be clear, Donald Trump has declared himself to be our dictator. As I warned, he always thinks of himself. He said on February 26th, he who saves his nation violates no law. That's a made-up quote attributed to Napoleon and others.
Right.
And 3 days later, the White House committed secular blasphemy. At 3 different social media sites, they put up a picture of Donald Trump wearing a royal British crown. Yeah. I'm sorry, what could be more offensive to Americans than that? But Donald believes he's special. He believes that law doesn't apply to him. He believes he's the only competent person. He makes this clear every day. And of course, he also demonstrates every day that he has not a clue to what he's doing. And that goes right to the fascist theory that I studied at the Chautauqua Institution, that eventually these tyrants fall. And of course, Gandhi taught us, all tyrants fall. The damage they can do before they do is horrific.
Do you think that, well, I mean, what I'm hoping is that someone is keeping a tally on all of these horrific policies that he's presenting, including taking away people's rights by stealth. I don't think people realize how they've lost their consumer protections. Right. They've lost their legal right to sue the government. They've lost so many things that are intangible, that are not sexy in terms of, right, marketing them through the media. And unfortunately, it means that you're basically free of rights. You can now be, even as an American citizen, abducted by federal agents and they don't need reason to show a warrant or even identify themselves, it seems. Well, that is a precedent that is being set by this movement. Whether it's legal or not, they don't really care.
Right. They don't. And grabbing people off the street without a warrant or probable cause is not legal, no matter what Tom Homan, the deportation czar, says. We know that more than 6 native-born U.S. citizens have apparently been grabbed and moved out of the country. Donald Trump himself said in a post he put up at Truth Social, eventually we're going to go after the homegrown ones. And he has talked about going after the citizenship of people he doesn't like Rosie O'Donnell. It's because Donald Trump sees himself as a dictator. How dare you question what I'm doing? And as I have pointed out in many lectures and appearances, that if we don't stop this, what I guarantee you lies down that road, because it happens with every authoritarian regime, right, left, doesn't matter, are firing squads. And, my children heard me on a radio show, they're all grown, but the two youngest ones one day saying, I get shot in the second round. And when I got off the phone, they laughed and said, Dad, you always say that having 6 kids proves you're an incurable optimist. If you think you get shot in the second round, you're more optimistic than even we imagine.
Yeah.
But that's what will come.
Well, one Republican state is executing people with firing squad at the moment because they couldn't get lethal injections. I mean, that's what America is currently doing. Well,
arguably, I covered the Gary Gilmore execution, and arguably it's one of the more humane ways if you're going to kill somebody, because you're instantly dead. Get 4 bullets.
Except it didn't work this time. I mean, they actually failed to kill this person.
Right. But a firing squad properly done is probably one of the more humane ways to execute somebody.
I can't believe we're even having this conversation, David.
I understand. But, there's a growing movement in the U.S. not only to bring back that, but the Iowa legislature, a bill's been introduced. I don't expect it to go anywhere, but a bill's been introduced that would make it a misdemeanor, a criminal offense, to give anyone COVID vaccines, because those are mRNA vaccines, or any other genetically based vaccine. Trump is right now proposing that we destroy a $750 million satellite that collects data on transpiration from the ground, so we can know, can you grow crops? Is there a drought going on? How are the trees doing? It costs very little money to operate this thing. Why would you destroy it? The official U.S. government website that posts the Constitution, 2 sections have been removed. Article 1, the congressional section. Section 9, this is what Congress may not do, that's been removed. And Article 10, which says that Congress alone has the power to suspend habeas corpus, they've disappeared. And some official spokesman said it was a coding error, and a whole bunch of software coders immediately posted it at websites. That's not how that works. That's not what happened. Somebody removed.
Yeah, but this is an intentional eradication of anything that might be thought of as useful or progressive to feed the masses. And also, I don't know how you feel. Go on.
Well, it extends everywhere. I mean, the exhibit at the Smithsonian, the national museums in Washington that are free for entry, no charge for entry.
Yes.
They removed Donald Trump's 2 impeachments, and they've now said, well, we're going to put him back up. It was temporary. Well, why would you remove it until you get the permanent one ready? They're removing. They went through Pentagon, and they removed black soldiers who won the Medal of Honor, women soldiers who won various honors and were valorous. They even removed a picture of Captain Paul Tibbets with his bomber, B-29 bomber, that dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima. Why? Because its name is after his mother, the Enola Gay. And so they clearly were going through and saying anything that says gay, we're going to remove. I mean, this is very Orwellian. George Orwell would be giving great lectures right now if he were still alive.
Right. But so there's a theme, isn't there?
Past. Yes. He who controls the past controls the present. He who controls the present controls the future. And there is an absolute theme here. We're going to remove anything that we don't like. We're going to just deny. I mean, Donald Trump last night or the night before said that the whole Epstein matter was a hoax. A hoax? Well, I'm sorry. Why did you arrest Epstein? Why did you prosecute Ghislaine Maxwell? Why were these settlements paid? A hoax? And it's because,
let's be clear for people watching what the theme is, because we need to join some dots here.
Sure.
And it seems to me that unless you are white, male, and rich, and ideally Christian, anybody who doesn't fall into those categories is going to suffer if they haven't already begun to suffer. So the using the software to spider to find references to trans people, to people of color. So black people, brown people, Asians, anybody who does not fit Trump's dream demographic. And he's talked so much recently about eugenics, and this clear eugenics theme runs through so many of his cabinet members that they are all subscribing to this theory, this kind of weird conspiracy theory that the white man is superior in some way. But the reality is, on the ground, the theme is that if you are not in that camp, then you will not only lose your rights, but lose access to food and education and government support and Medicare and Medicaid, and all of the things that people need is being stripped of anybody who does not look like they're a member at Mar-a-Lago.
So with one exception, I thoroughly endorse everything that you said. And the exception is that many of the people in America who call themselves Christians are in fact vigorous, vile anti-Christians.
Understood.
There is a bunch of memes going on somebody's made with a guy dressed up to look like the imagined Jesus, in which he says, I don't understand. I was teaching people to love the stranger and to sacrifice, and they're denouncing me. And I think it's a very smart way to try and communicate with people, because many of these people who call themselves Christians aren't. Donald created the White House Office of Faith. Who's running it? A woman who embezzled money from the band, I think it was Foreigner, that her husband, she married one of the members of the band.
Yes.
She lied about it and denied, surprise, surprise.
And she's a preacher and she speaks in tongues.
Yes. Yeah. And this is who Donald turns to, but that's who the people are around Donald. There are people who have, as he does, no moral core, or who are perfectly willing to sell their souls and their reputation to be associated with what they would like to have happen. There's a new saying I'm seeing pop up repeatedly in the United States. If your God doesn't like the people you don't like, you should think about whether you invented your God.
Right. Well, yeah, we've heard a similar thing from Ted Cruz recently in an interview with Tucker Carlson. I mean, their justification for certain things, goalposts are constantly moving to give credence to their crazy arguments. I don't know about you, David, but I wake up in the morning dreading checking the news on my phone for fear of what shitstorm is going to present itself. On Thursday morning, I woke up to this news that he'd ordered the Commerce Department to conduct a new census that would exclude undocumented immigrants from the official count. He said, based on modern-day facts and figures and using information gained from the presidential election of 2024, that people in our country illegally will not be counted. To people who don't understand the history of this and who don't have the information, this might sound like a good thing, and this is the problem with him. He does sell this stuff quite well, often better than Democrats sell these things. So it might make sense. But what is the reality on the ground of creating a new census that doesn't include everybody?
Well, it would allow or would require changing the number of representatives from the various states. I mean, Los Angeles County, for example, just Los Angeles County has more people than I think 40 of the 50 states. As many as a third of people in the city of LA, which is about a third of the county or 40% of the county population, are here either with temporary permission or no permission at all. And what Trump wants to do is rework Congress so that Republicans have a solid, clear majority. The problem he has is the Constitution says plainly that the census is to be done every 10 years and to count all persons and to count enslaved people and Native Americans as 3/5 of a person. It doesn't say people who are only people who are here who are citizens. It doesn't say citizens. And this is just in line with Donald's declaration that birthright citizenship is no longer the law of the land. I'm sorry, the 14th Amendment, Article 3, is absolutely plain and clear. It says all persons residing in the United States and subject to its laws are citizens. So if you were here as a British diplomat, you would be excluded from that. If you have a child who's born here, it would depend. If you had an American wife, for example, your child would be an American citizen. Trump wants to change all that. And Trump's goal has always been, and MAGA has always been code for make America white again. We're not going to be able to get rid of, in the view of those people, all the black, brown, yellow, Native American people they don't like. But we're going to make sure they know their place and that they better keep their mouths shut, their heads down, and do what we say or else. And that's a powerful appeal to a lot of Americans. And part of that I trace back to unfamiliarity. Justice Lewis Powell, very conservative member of the U.S. Supreme Court, who wrote the famous Powell memo that in order for business to be in charge in America, we have to destroy the unions, we have to bring the press to heel, etc. This was during the Ralph Nader era. And it was actually a very smart legal memo from the point of view of his client, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Powell, when the decision on whether the Supreme Court was going to continue to say that homosexual acts of sex are criminal, said to his clerks, I've never known anybody in my life who's gay, so I don't know what to think about this. Whereupon his clerks explained to him that they were all gay. Lack of familiarity. There are large parts of this country where you can grow up. I've had students who told me they never met a black person until they went away to college. And so it's easy.
But do you not fear, as I do, that we're going to wind the clock back? That he is going to ban gay marriage. That he is going to. He is going to ban interracial marriage. I mean, there will be these steps to wind the clock back to 1950, which is
1890. Let's all the way back to 1890.
Keep going.
The Gilded Age here. The Gilded Age is what they're trying to do. And all of this is of a piece. Donald has this bizarre mercantilist view of economics. He has an economics degree from an Ivy League school, but he knows nothing about economics. And Donald and I have talked a lot about economics in the last 4 decades. He has no clue, and he believes that if you impose a tariff, it means that China or India or Canada pays American taxes. No, it's effectively a retail sales tax on American consumers. It's also a scheme to allow domestic manufacturers to raise prices to just below the tariffed good and increase their profits, extracting more money from the vast majority of people and concentrating it in the hands of just a very few people. Donald doesn't know anything. I mean, the most telling thing about that is that in his first term, a couple of months into office, he was going to Japan. They stopped in Hawaii so he could promote his Trump-branded apartment building. And then they went to the USS Arizona Memorial, and he says to his chief of staff, retired Marine General Kelly, what are we going to? What is this? He didn't know what happened on December 7, 1941. How much more evidence do you need of his ignorance? And there's many, many other examples.
But he also doesn't care, does he? I mean, that's the difference. Like, not knowing is one thing, but he has no empathy. And we know, because part of the problem is that we spend so much time trying to analyze a madman, right?
You can't humiliate him. It's not possible to humiliate him.
Right. But because he is a malignant narcissist, and because he is a sociopath, as confirmed by dozens of psychiatrists in their analysis of him, they don't need to sit down with him. He has had more television appearances than anybody. There is a very clear diagnosis there. And yet people like yourself and myself, we spend ages trying to kind of get to the bottom of this decision-making, which simply comes from a place of insanity. So with that, and racism. So with that, how do we move forward? How does anybody move forward? How do Democrats move forward when the enemy that they're fighting is as mad as a box of frogs?
So you've hit upon, I think, the fundamental problem. The Democrats, up until now at least, have not figured out an effective strategy to deal with Donald Trump. But I would suggest there are several important things they can do. One of them is you don't compromise with him. Compromise doesn't work. You want to get a bill passed, it's got things that you like, but it's got stuff that's going to help Trump establish and consolidate his power so that he is the unquestionable, unchallengeable dictator. That's what he's working on. He is a dictator, but he isn't fully consolidated his power. You have to say, gee, I'm sorry, it's going to hurt some people I like, but I'm going to do everything I can to prevent this bill from becoming law. You have to draw a firm line in the sand. Secondly, you needed every opportunity to point out to people where Trump is being destructive, whether it's the satellite in the sky, burning food intended for poor people, the closing of rural hospitals, which has already begun, even though the cuts haven't started.
Yes,
in America, and not in any way give up. And I think you really need to push, especially with people who claim to be Christians. You need to push the child rapist part of this. And again, let me be clear, by the way, I don't have any solid proof that Donald Trump was having sex with 13-year-old girls. I have their testimony that they were forced to do this. And quoting Trump on things like, you should be glad you're losing your virginity to Donald Trump, not some incompetent 14-year-old boy. But let's see the evidence. And if the evidence shows, oh, no, Donald Trump had nothing to do with any of this, then put it out there. The fact that they won't tells you otherwise. It's a need to be relentless, to recognize there's a fatigue factor that cuts into people over time, but don't compromise. And institutions need to stand up. When Trump went after Columbia University, which has a $13 billion endowment, said, I'm going to take $400 million from you. I believe the appropriate response to that, and if I'd been the president of Columbia, I would have said, well, Mr. Trump, we will see you in court. In the meantime, we're going to take the necessary funds from our endowment, and we're going to ask people to donate. And I know, because I was the first journalist in America to cover philanthropy as nonprofits as a hard news beat 40 years ago, many, many top fundraisers. And I called a bunch of them and said, $400 million Columbia fighting Trump. And every one of them said they could raise that money in a handful of days. I called a multi-billionaire I texted a multi-billionaire that I know, and who could cover it all. And he said, I wouldn't cover it all. I wouldn't even cover a quarter of it because it looks like mine. But I would be able to, through people I know, raise the $400 million in a matter of days. Columbia knuckled under. And now we've seen these other institutions knuckle under. No, you can't do that. And I give a lot of talks to people. And in them, people say, well, what do we do? And I say, look, if you're not brave enough to stand at the front of the line, that's okay. Most people aren't. Don't expect that. Stand behind those people. Donate to the causes that will do this. Support them. And for God's sake, don't go after them because there's some little thing they said that's 5% of what's happening, and make that the issue. Recognize the goal here. We have a madman in the White House, an utterly ignorant madman who thinks only of himself and who is consolidating his power day by day. Stick with the fundamental important message. Now, we can still get out of this. We don't have to become a dictatorship that endures, but we can't. I mean, it's not at this point at all uncertain, and I'm less optimistic today than I was when you and I spoke at the beginning of this year, but there's no reason to give up hope. And don't be cynical. Nothing helps Donald Trump more than people saying, well, all the politicians are corrupt. All of them are sleeping around. Yeah, no evidence Joe Biden or Barack Obama was ever sleeping around.
It's not helpful, is it, to do that in this moment? But we need to see coalition building. I mean, I was surprised that the universities didn't join together, all of them, from Harvard through Columbia, and create a kind of and ring fence their authority. Is there rivalry between universities? I mean, is that the reason why they didn't do that?
No, I think the reason has to do with their boards of trustees, who are almost always very wealthy people. Usually there's, like one student representative from previous classes, things like that. But they're usually very, very wealthy people, and they're afraid. They're cowed by this. Now, I would point out the professorship has stood up much more. And one of the things I've been pointing out since I'm a professor at RIT is, when Donald says that we're being ripped off by these other countries, we're the source of foreign earnings. My students who come from overseas, they pay 100% of the tuition. We don't give discounts for that. I had a child who wanted to go to law school in Canada. I had to pay 100% of the Canadian tuition.
But he's asked for the lists of these people so he can deport them.
Well, yes, but what we should be arguing is, Donald, if you're worried that we're not earning enough money from the rest of the world, you should be endorsing professors. You should be endorsing the researchers who develop products. Now, Russell Vogt, who was the principal person behind Project 2025, which is where all of this destruction of the government is going on, he just went after the NIH. He says, well, all they're doing is woke stuff. And he picked a couple of research projects they're doing. Well, when you hear that there were professors who spent 20 years studying the saliva of Gila monsters that live in the Southwest desert, you think, yeah, that sounds kind of weird. Why would you do that? Ozempic and all the drugs like it came from that research. There's another one where they were studying some insect that instead of biting you, stabs you. What's going on there? Eventually, what they've done now is they don't have them on the market yet, but they found out, oh, here's a painkiller that's not addictive. It's not an opioid, but it's highly effective. That's what basic research is. And here's the killer fact for those people to whom facts mean something. More than half of the growth in the GDP in America per capita, per person, since 1948, the year I was born, is because of taxpayer investments in what's called basic science. That was I was just describing. There's no commercial application. You're trying to figure something out. Then people go, oh, we can make a product and make a fortune off of it. More than half. So you do what Donald Trump is doing. The implication is that 75 years from now, America will be half as wealthy. And I understand many people don't understand science. There's a movement among some of the what I call faux or fake Christians that science is just another religion and we need to stamp it out. But these are idiots and we shouldn't be giving in to people. And I mean idiot in the classic Greek ancient world sense of you only care about yourself. That's what the word originally meant. I used to teach the law of the ancient world. That's what the word meant in ancient Attica. You only cared about yourself.
I want to tap into your expertise on economics because the tariffs that have been, branded around for the last 6 months kicked in on Thursday. And this is going to change the economy seismically as I see it. Some countries have done quite interesting things. They are playing Donald Trump. Ursula von der Leyen, for example, a very smart woman in the Oval Office, kind of promised $600 billion worth of investment. Trump claims that he can do anything he wants with that. He can invest in anything he wants. He even said they're giving me $600 billion. He didn't even refer to the US or the economy as a whole. So they're starting to play him. Incidentally, the EU is not able to give $600 billion. They would have to vote on it, and that's not going to happen. But even Tim Apple, who has Tim Cook, who shall forever be known as Tim Apple. Right. I don't know if you saw the video sequence of him in the Oval Office presenting Donald Trump with this 24-karat gold stand with a kind of donut-shaped design. It was a sweetener. And Tim Apple, I've got to stop saying that. Tim Cook I've met Tim Cook. He's a fantastic individual, but he's a gay man. I'm sure he absolutely hates Trump and all of the policies that he stands for, although he would never say that out loud for the sake of his shareholders. But he played this game like foreign dignitaries giving gifts to kings or queens. He came in with this box and he set it up on the Resolute desk, and it was awful. Like I could see his whole soul kind of imploding as he had to do it. This is happening often. Gifts from businesses or foreign nations or fake deals that are announced so that Trump has something to show and be proud of.
So in his first term, Anthony, Donald announced ExxonMobil was going to make a $25 billion capital investment because of him. So Correct. I went to their filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and lo and behold, they had previously announced and had already planned $25 billion. And if you looked at the previous 4 or 5 years of investment, there was no change whatsoever. This is Donald creating his own reality. He's not the only person in public life I've covered who creates his own reality, but nobody does it with the level of skill and focus that he does. Now, on the tariffs, I need to give a little very brief history lesson, but it's very important. When the fifth-rate British General Cornwallis surrendered to the American forces, we created a government called the Articles of Confederation. It had no president. It had no power to tax. It had no power to regulate business. And it required unanimous consent on everything. Surprise, surprise, it didn't work. And so a meeting to handle a dispute over moving sandbars in the Delaware River, which separates New Jersey and Pennsylvania, turned into writing the U.S. Constitution. And that Constitution gave us a president, but the reason we did it was two things. It gave our government the power to tax us. Totally contrary to what Americans thought, tax is terrible, horrible thing, 4-letter word spelled in 3 letters. And the power to regulate business. Under the U.S. Constitution, only Congress can impose tariffs, except for a very narrow emergency area that Congress has given to presidents and which has been basically unexercised because it's so minor. What Trump is negotiating are deals, if there actually are deals. We have yet to see one of them in writing. But he has no authority to do this. So anybody who's paying a tariff is going to do so along with a claim to get the money back. So it's the importer who originally pays the tax. So BMW doesn't pay it. It's the company that imports the BMW, which may be an arm of BMW. It may be an American company on its own. And they're all going to seek to get this back. Tariffs have a secondary and very important effect. Imagine you own Anthony Davis cars, and you sell cars made in Michigan out the door for $10,000 each wholesale, and you make a $1,000 profit. Trump puts a 60% tariff on Chinese cars. I don't know of any Chinese car right now sold in the U.S. You're not going to continue to sell cars for $10,000 because the Chinese competing car is $16,000. You're going to raise your price to $15,000. That means you're going to make a profit now of $6,000 a car, not $1,000, but $6,000. And even if you can only sell half as many cars because they're too expensive for people to buy, you're going to make $3,000 compared to the one you were making. You're going to triple your profits. This is a scheme to take money out of the pockets of ordinary people and redistribute them. That's what I wrote a best-selling series on how the American economy really works early in this century. Perfectly legal, taxes, free lunch subsidies, the fine print suppressing competition, all still in print, by the way, after years. And those books explain how money is quietly siphoned out of the pockets of ordinary people and sent to the top. Well, after my books came out, not inspired by my books, I don't believe, but after it came out, the Rand Corporation, the think tank that the Air Force and the federal government started and Boeing Corporation started in 1948, did a study. Well, how much money's been redistributed upward? Because everybody thinks, we're being taxed to give money to the poor. We have a minimal welfare state in this country. $50 trillion in about 45 years. If the bottom 99% of Americans had $1 trillion a year more for a half century, we wouldn't have all these people who are desperate. You wouldn't see people driving beater cars that don't belong on the road. You wouldn't see people in horrible debt and terrified. They're what's called in America ALICE, asset limited, income constrained, employed. So you work, you don't make enough money to get by, and you don't have any savings. To escape poverty, according to the ALICE measure developed by a charity group called United Way, in metropolitan areas of the East Coast and the West Coast and the few in the Midwest like Chicago, a couple with no children needs to make about $80,000 a year, and a couple with children who need child care needs to make over $90,000 a year. That's to escape poverty. Yet half of American households get by on about $60,000 or less. And so Donald Trump is engaged in a scheme that is designed by the people who are pushing this stuff on him to extract more money from ordinary people and redistribute it to people who have more money than they can ever make any use of. Jeremy Bentham taught us, and John Mill, and not quite Adam Smith, he hadn't gotten to that point, but marginal utility. I tell my students, imagine it's the last day of the year, and you have to prove to the government after the year ends where your last dollar came from under penalty of death. Well, if you work at some job 40 or 60 hours a week and it's only your salary, that's not a problem. What if you're a billionaire? You're going to die because you can't prove which dollar came last. And there are literally people who on the last day of the year have to say to themselves, well, I can eat dinner or I can take the bus to go home. Which am I going to do? Because I don't have any money. And we're measuring our society under Donald Trump by how many billionaires and centimillionaires we have, not by how is the average typical American doing. And they don't care. It's very clear.
But you've touched on something that I think is really important. I mean, I've been peddling a theory that they actually want people to die.
I think that's true.
There is this desire by taking away these either essential services or the support network or vaccines for pandemics or even the flu, that they know they might look at the chart on flu and go, okay, this many people die. Invariably, they are poor. And so therefore we are going to shut down the free flu vaccine. Is it as macabre as that?
It is exactly that macabre. There are videos out there of prominent politicians on the right saying about all the deaths from COVID, which, remember, in America, more than 1 million people died more than we needed if we'd followed the science. Yes. That's just culling the herd. People are going to die anyway, and now we don't have to spend all that money on them. About 25 years ago, and I encourage you to get and put on your air the video of this, a congressman, an obnoxious guy, a lawyer from Florida, Democrat named Alan Grayson, said, here's the Republican health care plan. If you get sick, die quickly or die soon. And he was, I think he was formally censured by Congress for saying that. He certainly was criticized heavily. But you know what? He was right. It was exactly right. There is no sanctity of human life. This is not a new thing. When I was spending 3 years of my life telling the true story of the LAPD, how incompetent and brutal and all the crimes they were committing and how corrupt the department was when I was at the LA Times, there was a lot of bad shootings that I wrote about. And members of the police commission were trying to get into the mindset of the LAPD leadership, the sanctity of human life. And we've lost a lot of that in the world. We need to respect human life. So starving people, whether it's through the aid program in Africa or what we're seeing happen in Gaza, taking food stamps away from poor families and children, saying we're going to stop federally funded school lunches for children, many of whom that's the only food they get. That is simply an utter disregard for human life, and that it's people in many cases who call themselves Christians who say that is appalling. And so one of the things I've also done in some of my talks is I've called on people who are actual Christians, who try to live a life of caring for other people and sacrifice, said you need to call these people out. You need to say you're not Christians.
But that is starting to happen, isn't it? And we're seeing it at town halls, especially with a Republican audience calling out their elected representative. My question, though, really, and I suppose there's a good place to finish, is that if you are starting to recognize, if you voted for Trump, and, we've seen this from the Latino community, for example, so many votes for Donald Trump and their family are being deported and they're staying home and not going to work for fear of being abducted and sent to a country they've never even been to. So I hope and I pray that community is starting to see where they went wrong with their vote. Some of the Christians who voted for Trump because he was their Messiah are starting to see that everything that he is doing is so fundamentally anti-Christian. But what about regular Republicans, fiscal conservatives maybe, who see that tariffs are a lie and that they are designed to enrich Trump and his wealthy friends, but for everybody else they're going to carry the can for these costs? And obviously there was that horrific bill that we haven't spoken about yet that basically enshrined this into law. this kind of stealing from the poor and giving it to the rich, the kind of reverse Robin Hood scheme, that people will actually vote against Donald Trump and the people that support and represent him? Do you think that actual shift will happen?
Yeah, Trump has demanded every state provide certification for their election results to the federal government, which appears to all be part of a scheme to rig the election. And remember, every time Donald Trump loses, he didn't get nominated for an Emmy for his TV show. Well, the system's rigged. This is always his complaint, and it's nonsense.
Right.
It takes time to break people away. So up until April 1, we had good job growth. The Biden effects that created more jobs than all the Republicans since World War II in just 4 years. That's now stopped. Job growth in America is pretty much stopped. I won't be shocked if we end up in a month or three having negative job growth. The costs of goods are not going down. Donald promised he was going to lower drug prices by 1,500%, which is mathematically impossible.
That's right, and eggs by 400%.
Right, yeah. And 90% of the generic drugs in the United States come from India, so they're not going to cost more. But it takes time for these things to filter through the economy. But you're going to see more and more people as Trump's incompetence and the appointment of all these incompetent people affect him. Nobody in America, except for a crazy pure Trumper, believes gasoline is $1.99 a gallon. It's about $3.20 a gallon across the country. And so this will catch up with him, but it takes time.
Yeah.
And the elections are in November of 26. That's plenty of time for the economy to fall apart. And I'm sorry that's going to happen. People are going to suffer. There are people who are going to die. But without that, then this wouldn't change because people can justify to themselves. Rationalization is one of the great skills of the human mind. And none of us want to say, oh, I got taken here. A con artist made me a mark. It's embarrassing. I mean, we periodically will have a story, about some husband or wife who lost all their money in a Nigerian prince scam, and the retirement comes, and then the person kills themselves, or sometimes they kill themselves and their spouse because they can't address it. We're going to have to go through some terrible pain for this. I'm hoping that Starmer and the other world leaders continue to not knuckle under to Donald. A few of them have, but most of them, they've played him the way that Tim Cook played him. And Donald is so dumb that he doesn't get that. And by the way, remember one of his professors at Penn said about him, he's the damnedest, dumbest student I ever had. And I assure you from many hours spent with Donald Trump that his lack of knowledge and lack of shame about being so doesn't affect him. So the conditions are going to create breaks and separations. There are going to be people 100 years from now who go, Donald Trump was right. Just like there are people who say Hitler was right. Don't worry about them. Worry about the people you can move a little bit. You can put a wedge in and separate them and get them to open their eyes. And if we get a Democratic majority in the House, a lot of what Trump is doing stops. If we can get a majority of Democrats in the Senate, which given who's up for election, that's a good chance we could do it. That stops all of his nominations of people like Emil Bove, who's now on the federal appeals court in Washington, and who, according to career prosecutors, told him to ignore federal court orders the government doesn't like. We can stop that. We don't have enough to impeach people and remove them. It would take 67 senators, 2/3, to do that. But people, don't lose heart. Don't be fatigued. Don't be cynical. Focus on the places you can change, not the things you can't change or do anything about. Stay informed and look for things where there's some coordination information. I've tried to get a journalist who's spent a lot of time following all the developments about the Epstein files and the young women. And I said, would you please write a piece for DC Report, the news service I founded 7 years ago. I don't run it anymore because I couldn't stand doing it every day. But I said, how about you put together a piece for us with links to videos and a timeline so people can see that it's not a random thing here or there. There's a full record you can put in one place. And I got that idea simply because my wife, a brilliant woman who was the CEO of one of the biggest charities in America for 30 years, I was discussing something about the Epstein case, and she said, I didn't know any of that. I said, what? She reads the New York Times every day and the local paper and other things. And she went, I didn't know any of that. I knew there were some women. And you said there's 1,000 women? And I said, yeah, there's somewhere close to 1,000 women. And she said, where have I read that? And I suddenly realized, oh, you're right. Nobody has put together. We need some journalists to put these things together. And lots of journalists are doing great work. The New York Times, where I work, I pick it up and I go, boy, there's a story that is some of the greatest journalism human beings have ever produced. On the other hand, you move over one column and I go, pure crap. This reporter can write a good story, but they don't know what the hell they're writing about. That's so be skeptical of the journalism you read, but don't reject it. Just read it with a grain of salt, pay attention, recognize there's huge skill differences and understanding of the world differences among journalists. I urge Americans a lot to read The Guardian, which is just again and again and again, along with the Wall Street Journal and the Miami Herald, done great work on a number of issues about Trump, as well as the New York Times and the Washington Post. But this didn't happen in a day. The conditions that allowed Donald Trump to arise, that are explained in my books I mentioned earlier on the economy, Perfectly Legal, Free Lunch, and the Fine Print, that took place over 50 years. You're not going to fix this overnight. And when Donald Trump is gone, assuming we succeed and we get rid of him, that is not the end of the story. We have to go back and fix the Constitution. Large parts of the Constitution are unenforceable because no one has standing to enforce them. We've got to go and fix those provisions, and we have to recognize that people who want to get power to abuse it and people who are decent and want to make the society better, there will always be a tension. There will always be people in both of those groups. That is the human condition. 10,000 years from now, there will be issues like this because that's who we are as a species.
Okay. I'm so grateful to you, always. We could talk for hours. David Cay Johnston, thank you for joining The Weekend Show.
Thank you, Anthony.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.